Dark bleatings, everybody. Bit of a different video for you today. We're doing a office / bookshelf tour because I'm in the process of redecorating my house. So yeah, I thought if I do a little bookshelf tour, then I don't have to be on camera when I'm covered in paint and worry about getting paint all over my office. I have 600 plus books that we're going to be taking a swift little look at. The door to my office, where all the reading and magic happens. Dun, 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 dun. I'm going to start with my non-horror bookcase. Now, let's quickly skim over the Harry Potter series. I had these as a Christmas present some years back now from my mum. They're the Gryffindor collection, so they have that cool little edging there on the pages. I do want to make it absolutely clear that I not only completely disagree with J.K. Rowling's views on trans people, but I vehemently oppose them. I think her views are disgusting. I do not like people who go out of their way to make life harder for other people. Next up, we've got the Hunger Games series. Anyway, next up, Douglas Copeland's The Gum Thief. I don't remember what it's about, but I know I've read it. It wasn't for me. This one is a little poetry collection written by teenagers, and the reason I have it is because my brother had a poem published in there when he was about 12. This is my underwater adventure. And when oh, nuts. And I mean literally my underwater adventure. My mum had this sort of written for me when I was a kid. So it's a beautifully illustrated tale about me and my friends having an underwater adventure. Next in the line, I've got Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, and then the recently released The Testaments that came out in the last couple of years. But next up, we've got some Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, Good Omens, which I have not yet read, The River of Souls by Robert Buchanan. Next up, The Colour of Magic, which is the first in Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, which was absolutely wonderful and made me want to read more fantasy. Here we got my Lord of the Rings collection. I would really love to get a lovely, beautiful, illustrated hardback collection of those. Next, Fairy Tales from Hans Andersen. This book is so old that it will fall apart if I open it. Next up, I've got the Grimm's Brothers fairy tales, and then I've got my copies of Alice in Wonderland. I'm still on the lookout for the perfect hardback cover for Alice in Wonderland. It's one of my favourite books. Moving on to someone else who's problematic, apparently, Roald Dahl. Next up, some sci-fi. I've got A Scanner Darkly by Philip K. Dick, and then I've got The Invisible Man, The Time Machine, The Island of Dr. Moreau, and The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I have only read The Island of Dr. Moreau and The Time Machine out of these, and then I've The First Man on the Moon as well. The First Men in the Moon. Then I've got V.C. Andrews, Flowers in the Attic, which I've read, and then Petals on the Wind, and If There Be Thorns. Next, we've got We Need to Talk About Kevin, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, William Golding, Lord of the Flies. I read that for the first time last year. I've got The Absent One, Zero Day, and then I've got Broken Down Heroes of the Western Night by Stephen Kosniewski. And next up, Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, which I bought when I was an edgy teenager. And then I've got a copy of the Bible, and then a copy of the Satanic Bible. Something I would like to point out that actually really annoyed me is that the Holy Bible, if you go into a bookshop, you will find that in the religion section. If you find the Satanic Bible in a bookshop, it will be in the fiction section, and I really think that that's quite disrespectful and unfair, because you cannot very well tell me that that is not fiction and it's religion, but this is fiction and not religion. So, you know, I'm sorry, but two sides of the same coin. That's my TED talk on that. Next up, a couple more reference books. The Story of Wales by John Gower. So this is sort of like a history of Wales, which I haven't managed to read all of yet. And then I've got The Isles of Many Gods, which is sort of about Celtic deities, I think. Then I've got John Yorke's Into the Woods, which I haven't read. I've got Consider This by Chuck, I can never say his surname right, Chuck Pal, my good pal Chuck. You Might Be a Zombie and Other Bad News is a collection of humorous articles from cracked.com. The Disaster Artist by Greg Sestero, who infamously played Mark in The Room. And then I've got Catch Me If You Can, which is the true story by Frank W. Abagnale. Then I've got The Call of the Weird by Louis Theroux. Charlie Brooker's Dawn of the Damned, a collection of his articles. Big Charlie Brooker fan as well. I think he's a really, really good writer. Heroin Diaries by Nikki Sixx. Nikki Sixx is the bassist for Motley Crue. I used to be a very, very big Motley Crue fan, and I was reading this book after I came out of hospital after having to have a lot of life-saving surgery, which is a story for another day. And this book is about him sort of trying his battle with heroin addiction, and I read this when I was trying to come off morphine. I was on a morphine drip for a couple of weeks, and a constant morphine drip as well, so it was just going right into my veins 24 hours a day, and that is a lot of time to be on morphine. So I was, I had a chemical addiction to it when I came out, and this book like really helped me overcome the symptoms of drug withdrawal. Basically, it's a really, really brutal time, and going through that experience and reading this book like hand in hand helped me with my own experience and gave me a lot more sympathy for other people who have addictions. This is the biography of Michael J. Fox, No Time Like the Future. This is Marilyn. Oh, what are you still doing here? I'm not going to talk about Marilyn Manson right now. But that can yoink off to the charity shop. Simon Pegg's Nerd Do Well, which I haven't read yet, but I'm a massive Simon Pegg fan. And then I've got Bruce Campbell's autobiography, If Chins Could Kill. So here are some books of scripts that I have. Got your 7 basic plots, your writer's journey. These are really great books if you're a writer, if you do scripts. I think that this is transferable to novels and other stories as well, like great reference books. And then I've got a whole bunch of sort of reference academia here. So Storytelling and the Sciences of the Mind, The Story Factor. This is about the psychology of storytelling. The Pocketbook of Proofreading, which I use when I'm proofreading and editing for people. Elements of Style, which is possibly one of the greatest single grammar guides that you can get for UK grammar especially. And I've got grammar and punctuation here. So the reason I have these is because I used to be a personal tutor, and I used to help people, adults mostly, that were resitting English A-levels and GCSEs. The Reader's Brain, this is, how neuroscience can make you a better writer. I started reading that, did not understand a word, but I do plan to revisit when I'm, not as dumb. And then I have got some general psychology, Freud, the ego and the id, or id, however you want to say it, the interpretation of dreams, and a general introduction to psychoanalysis. I sometimes just go through phases where all of a sudden I get obsessed with a topic, and this is one such occasion where I ended up buying all of these books. Tracks in Psychic Wilderness, that's psychology again. And then I have Difficult Man, which is an academic collection of essays, I think, about characters in TV shows and how they've changed over the years. I bought that when I was in uni, and then I kind of didn't need it, so it's still waiting to be read. And then this bottom shelf are all completely unread thrillers, except for The Dry, which I did read, and that was pretty entertaining. That was my first thriller. Next we move on to the Stephen King shelves. I'm standing on a swiveling chair. Ah, shit. We have got Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, the Bachman books, which contain Rage, The Long Walk, Roadwork, and The Running Man. So I've got the uncut version of The Stand, and then the regular version of The Stand. Night Shift, one of the greatest short story collections known to man. The Dead Zone, a Carrie Funko Pop. Firestarter, Dance Macabre, which is a collection of essays. I haven't read that in a long time. Christine, cool little It book insert that my mum got me for Christmas. Different Season, it's a collection of novellas. Cujo, Rabid Dog. Pet Cemetery, you don't want to go down that road. Cycle of the Werewolf, The Eyes of the Dragon is a YA fantasy. The Talisman, co-written with Peter Straub, is an adult fantasy. Thinner is about a rich guy who gets away with a thing because he's white and rich. Hearts in Atlantis is a collection of novellas. This is The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, about a girl who gets lost in the woods and eats the world's most delicious sounding egg. Storm of the Century is a script about the Storm of the Century. Bag of bones. There are no bags of bones in that, so false advertising. The Green Mile, one of the greatest, saddest, and most beautiful stories ever put to the page. The Regulators is a Clutch song and also the name of this book. Desperation is a twinner for this book, so these are basically the same story but with differences. So this is the one that Stephen King released, and then this was released under Richard Bachman, and it was like an alternate version, so they came out at the same time. Rose Madder, greatest opening scene ever, but oh, the hand puppet man. Insomnia. Ralph is one of the oldest protagonists in age I've ever read, and I loved him, and I relate because, you know, I have insomnia frequently. Needful Things is about a shop where everything that you might need, your heart's desire, will be there, but the guy doesn't really trade in money, he trades in weird favours, not sexy ones. Nightmares and Dreamscapes is a short story collection. Gerald's Game is about a couple who want to spice up their love life and it goes hideously wrong. Dolores Claiborne is possibly one of the funniest characters that Stephen King has ever written and one of my favourite protagonists of all time. 4 Past Midnight is a novella collection. The Dark Half is about an author with a pseudonym that he wants to kill and things get kind of literal. Misery is a dirty birdie. The Tommyknockers features a hovering homicidal vending machine, so I mean you should read that. I don't know if you've ever heard of this one. This is one of his lesser known works. Yeah, something about a clown, I don't know. Oh yeah, I have this little Pennywise, old Pennywise pop and new Pennywise pop, and this little dude was a custom made wedding present for me from Alice Bazaar. That is Skeleton Crew, also one of the greatest short story collections of all time. I'm off the treacherous swivel chair now. Okay, so little Jack pop here, and behind him we have 2 versions of On Writing. They've got different forwards in them. Secret Windows is a collection of essays, some non-fiction. Dreamcatcher, Shitweasels. Black House, shit book. I'm just kidding. This is the follow-up to The Talisman, so this is the sequel, again written with Peter Straub. I liked this one more than The Talisman. From a Buick 8 is possibly one of the most underrated books that Stephen King has ever written. Everything's Eventual is a short story collection. The Colorado Kid is, well, it exists. Cell! You know, people do spend too much time on their phones, so I see what he was doing there. Lisey's Story, loved the first half, not so much the second half. Blaze, released as a Richard Bachman book, is kind of Stephen King's take on Of Mice and Men. Dew McKee, not one of my favourites, and I can't think of a quippy way to describe it, so I'm just going to move on to Just After Sunset, which is a short story collection. Then we've got Stephen King Goes to the Movies, and this is a collection of essays where he talks about movies. Under the Dome, wasn't a huge fan of the ending on that one, but it didn't ruin my enjoyment of the book. Blockade Billy, I bought that just because I really liked this edition, the little hardback, but it is included in one of the short story collections that I've already mentioned, I think. Full Dark No Stars is a novella collection, 4 novellas that are all murder themed. 11/22/63 is a time travel romance, which are 2 things that sound like my worst nightmare, but it was one of the greatest books. Hello, Wendy. Joyland is a spooky little fairground summer story, so a good summer read if you're someone who likes to read seasonally. Doctor Sleeps, the sequel to The Shining that I never knew I wanted, but absolutely adored it. And then Nightmares in the Sky, it's a collection of gargoyle-y pictures, and Stephen King... Oh, sorry, by F. Stop Fitzgerald, and then Stephen King has sort of just commented on them, but if you're a Stephen King completionist like me, then you have to get everything. Charlie the Choo Choo was written under the pseudonym of Beryl Evans, and that's sort of like a kid's book, illustrated kid's book about Blaine the Mono, essentially. Then I've got my Dark Towers, including The Wind Through the Keyhole, and then I've got this beautiful hardback illustrated version of The Gunslinger and The Dark Man, which is an illustrated poem essentially about Randall Flagg. So I've got the Creep Show comic here, and then I have the first Dark Tower Marvel comic, and I do plan to collect the rest of these, but they're really, really expensive. Well, too expensive for me. Next up, Mr. Mercedes, about a guy who, you know, goes for a joyride that's a bit extreme. Revival, don't want to spoil it. Finders Keepers, sequel to Mr. Mercedes. The Bazaar of Bad Dreams is a short story collection. And then End of Watch is the third and final instalment in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. Next I've got the Gwendy's. Now I have cheated, you'll notice. Gwendy's Button Box, Gwendy's Magic Feather, and Gwendy's Final Task. Now these first and third are co-written with Richard Chizmar. Richard Chizmar wrote the second Gwendy book solo, but I put it on a different shelf just because it wasn't Stephen King, and it just annoyed me to no end that the three weren't together, so I made an exception and put Richard Chizmar there, and actually that one is my favourite in the trilogy. Sleeping Beauties, co-written with Owen King, who's Stephen King's son. The Outsider isn't a Mr. Mercedes book, but Holly Gibney is a protagonist in this one, so she's a Mr. Mercedes character, so I would read the Mr. Mercedes trilogy before you hit this one. Elevation is a weird novella about a guy who's losing weight but not mass. The Institute, If It Bleeds, is a novella collection, and there is a Holly Gibney story in there as well, which you should read the Mr. Mercedes trilogy before you hit this one. Later is the only book in the Hard Case series, the Hard Case crime series, that I loved. There is a very unexpected universe tie-in towards the end of that one, but I really enjoyed it. Billy Summers wasn't for me. Fairy Tale, not really for me either. That one's sort of like dark fantasy horror. Holly, I absolutely loved, and if you haven't guessed, this is another Holly Gibney book, and people either love or loathe this one, but I am in the love camp. That's the latest Stephen King, so that's... Oh, and here's an owl! Okay, so that is the last Stephen King book, and I didn't mention this earlier, but I have read every single one of the Stephen King books, so I am all up to date. Next on this shelf, because I had space shelves left on the case, this is my Tim Lebbon collection, and if you're not reading Tim Lebbon, why are you not reading Tim Lebbon? These are his novellas over here, so this is The Reach of Children, Still Life, Rhyme, and The Last Day and the First. Then I've got Festival by Christopher Golden and Tim Lebbon, and it's illustrated by Peter Bergting. Sorry if I've said that wrong. I haven't read this one yet. I think that this is a comic. I think this might be a Dark Horse comic. And then I've got After the War, which these two Tim gave me as gifts, which was really nice of him. All Nightmare Long is a fairly new release, which is a short story collection. The Hunt is a thriller about a guy who goes out for a run one day and then comes back and his wife and kids have been taken. The Silence is one of my favourite books of like the last decade at least, and it's about monsters that hunt by sound, and it's apocalyptic, and there's a family with a deaf daughter that have survived because they can sign. And no, it is not a rip-off of A Quiet Place. That really annoys me every time it comes up. This book came first, and you know, if anyone has ripped anyone off, I'm not saying that's definitely what happened, but in any case, that story is amazing, and Tim Lebbon is the one who should be getting the credit for it, in my opinion. The Last Storm is, again, apocalyptic, and it's a very, very weird blend of sort of like sci-fi fantasy almost, but not quite fantasy, and horror. Eden I have not yet read, but I'm pretty sure that that's apocalyptic as well. Relics I haven't yet read, and Coldbrook I haven't read, but I'm really excited because I know that that is zombies. 30 Days of Night is the novelization that Tim Lebbon wrote of the movie. I like this even more than the film. And then I've got my Joe Hill collection, which I'm slowly building. I have not yet read The Fireman, have not yet read Heart-Shaped Box. Strange Weather is a novella collection of some truly creepy stories. 20th Century Ghosts is a short story collection, a whole mixed bag of things there. Horns is about a guy who wakes up one day with a very unusual power that seems good, but it turns out to be terrible. It's really, really, really good. And then Nosferatu is an incredible, scary Christmas vampire story of all things. It was great. Down here, I've got a little cabinet of curiosities. So down here is my shelfie. I won't hover on this too long because I'm embarrassed, but this is a collection of books that I have stories in. Holy cannoli. Alrighty, let's take on this bad boy. back on the swiveling chair. Okay, so from this point forward, everything is organised in sections. So these are PS publishing books that I don't own anything else by these authors, so I put them together. So I've got Pomegranates by Priya Sharma, which is a wonderful sort of Greek mythology horror, and it's unlike anything you've ever read. Tainted Isle by Dan Weatherer, I have not yet read. Then we've got Witches. So I've got Hex by Thomas... I can never say the surname, but this is a great witch book. The Adirondack Witch by Patrick Ruman. I think that's how you say your name. Sorry if you see this, Patrick, and I butchered it. Then I've got Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin and The Exorcist. All great books. My little Baphomet statue there. I do love goats. We are happy goat horror. Got my Pazuzu statue there. He should probably really live with The Exorcist, don't you think? The Little House of Bones by Beverly Lee, which I haven't read yet. So this shelf is sort of like miscellaneous authors where I've only got one book by them and I don't have other books from that press to put them with. Then I've got Something Wicked This Way Comes, The Rats, which is one of the first horror books I read that wasn't a Stephen King book, and it's gross but so much fun. Psycho, which I've seen the film first, but I loved reading the book. I kind of wish I'd got to read that without knowing the ending. The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, which I have not yet read. Ancient Lawman by Ian David Noakes, which I haven't got to read yet. Crooked Little Vein by Warren Ellis, which was a gift, but I haven't read it yet, and I've had it about 10 years. Greensmith by Alia Whitley. Oh, I'm so sorry. Scott Smith, The Ruins. Broken Monsters by Lauren Bukes. Niceville by Carsten Stroud. I haven't managed to get to any of these yet. I have read Naomi Booth's Sealed, which is a pregnancy horror story and also an apocalypse tale, so pretty nifty. Nifty, why did I say that? Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Cesar, which I bought because everyone was banging on about it. So this is a YA sort of little small town horror. The Five Turns of the Wheel by Stephanie Ellis, which I haven't read yet, but I do plan to get to that soon. Self-Storage by Jay Bonenzinger, who wrote the Walking Dead novels, and I'm a fan of those, so I met him at a convention and got this signed, so I was pretty happy. Aurora by David Coep. I'm so sorry. This is Thrall by Mary Sangiovanni, and it is the first book that I ever won. And I love this book because I won it in a Goodreads giveaway when I first joined the site years ago. Bloodtooth by DW Hits, which was a review copy. I've got a review of that on the website. A massive sprawling tale that sort of reminded me in some ways of it. The Black Rose series by L.M. Morgan, which I think is kind of sexy horror, but I haven't read it yet. Any of the editions. I've been meaning to get around to that for a while. Benjamin Percy's Red Moon, which is a werewolf novel, and The Boy Who Drew Monsters by Keith Donoghue, which I found... I still don't know how I feel about that one. Down here we've got Big Bath. Oh, there goes the chair again. So here we have my Black Shuck book. So this isn't Any Way You Know, a short story selection by Gary McMahon, which is sort of like peculiar, weird and quiet horror, I'd say. Green and Pleasant Land, which is the first great British horror book, and I bought that years and years ago. Really, really great. All That's Lost by Ray Cluley, which I haven't managed to get to yet, but that's a short story collection. And then this bad boy by Sean Hogan is Twilight/Screaming, which I didn't realise this is the second book, and I need to get the first one. So these little fellas are the Black Shuck Shadows series. So the books aren't connected to each other, but each one will have a theme, so all the stories will adhere to a theme. So this is Paul Kane's The Spirit of Christmas, Phil Sloman's Broken on the Inside, which was great, Suffer Little Children by Penny Jones, which is absolutely savage, Shadow Cats by Anna Taborska, which I haven't read yet and I'm really excited to read, The Watcher in the Woods by Charlotte Bond, really, really excited to get to that. Dan Coxon's Green Fingers, which is sort of like nature-themed horror, which was really, really, really great. Fearsome Creatures by Leah Whiteley, which I haven't read yet. Rachel Knightley's Beyond Glass, which is absolutely fabulous. And then I have got The Flowering by Alison Littlewood, which I haven't yet read. And then next to my Black Shuck collection, I've got my Sinister Horror collection. And so these are all my Justin Park books. Company of Words, Amazing Novella, The Exchange, absolutely batshit insane. Death Dreams at Christmas and Death Dreams in a Whorehouse are short story collections, as well as Fear is Seldom Silent. Mad Dog, if you... I can't tell you the genre because it's a spoiler, but this is... Oh, there goes the chair. Yeah. As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, Mad Dog by J.R. Park is one of the greatest stories of its subgenre, but I can't tell you the subgenre, but I recommend it. Terabyte is like techno horror. Upon Waking is just absolutely bloody vicious. Some women, I tell you. And Punch is one of... this might be my favourite Justin Park book. This is a guy who returns to his town, and clearly he left for a reason. And then you've got the other Black Room manuscripts, 2, 3, and 4. If you want to get any of the Sinister Horror books, by the way, you need to get them before January because it's closing its doors and all of these amazing books are going out of print, which is so sad. My Dead and Blackened Heart is by Andrew Freudenberg, short story collection, which I haven't read yet, but I'm doing that before the end of the year. John McNee's Doom Cabaret is just... what an absolute great time that is. He's such a talented writer, and it's sort of like, if you like sort of like vaudeville, burlesque, that's the kind of like feel that this collection has to me. I loved it. Tales from the Graveyard by Guy Smith wasn't quite my cup of tea, but I did enjoy it. Hellowship is exactly what it sounds like. Benedict Jones, J. Jones. I Dream of Mirrors by Chris Kelso is a what the fuck did I just read book, but not in a bad way, just in a what was it like. I can't really describe it. It's very, very surreal. I really enjoyed it. Trying to Be So Quiet and Other Hauntings by James Everington is a short story collection, and then I've got which I enjoyed, and then Marked by Stuart Park, I have not yet read, and then I've got a little bat, and my cousin made me that lights up, and this is Barry. My mother-in-law needle felt him for me, and I love him. He's one of my favourite things I own. Next up, I've got my Alexis Henderson books. I'm a really big fan. So The House of Hunger, if you like vampire fiction, you might enjoy this. And then The Year of the Witching, obviously, if you enjoy books about witches, you might enjoy that. If anyone would like my paperback copy of The Year of the Witching, first come, first served, let me know, and I will be happy to post that to you for free. I don't need 2 copies, obviously. Starless and Bible Black by Susan York is a wonderful, quiet horror short story collection. And then I also have Roads Less Travelled, which is Susan York and Ryan Hughes, which I'm going to be reading very shortly because I'll be reviewing it. Then I've got my Tracy Fahey books. So I've got They Shut Me Up, which is a novella, which is new. I haven't yet read it. The Unheimlich Maneuver is one of the greatest gut punch short story collections I've ever read, and it's from Sinister Horror, but I wanted to group my Tracys together. And then this is Sinister Horror Company as well, so again, if you want it, you need to get it before January. And it's I Spit Myself Out, but I think that's a short story collection also. Then I've got my Jan Edwards books, which she's a writer that like no one seems to have heard of, but it's such a shame because she's so good. So this, A Small Thing for Yolanda, like Justin Park's Mad Dog. I don't want to say what subgenre this is because it's great, but it's a really wee little read, and that's kind of like a noir horror. And then Fables and Fabrications is a short story collection that I have not yet read. Then I've got my Shirley Jacksons, We Have Always Lived in a Castle. Not quite my cup of tea, but that's kind of like a spooky family tale. And then The Lottery, which is one of the greatest short stories ever, which I'm pretty sure things like The Hunger Games owe a lot to. Got my Susan Hills here. Dolly, that is exactly what it looks like. That story is creepy as shit. The Woman in Black, I listened to the audiobook and it was great. Really, really creepy. She does like gothic ghost horror so well. Gemma Moore, my new obsession. So I've got Dear Laura, which is a really grisly little novella about a girl who's in a sort of annual letter exchange with an absolute creep, and Full Immersion, which I just read, which is a mental health story for the ages. It's unlike anything I've ever read, and it's poking out because I'm going to write a full review on that very shortly. In fact, I'm going to take it off the shelf so I don't forget. Then I've got my C.C. Adams stories. So I've got Downwind Alice, which is a fabulous werewolf story. Misery and Other Lines, which is a short story collection from Sinister Horror. But obviously I wanted my C.C.'s together. C.C. is also the greatest hugger in the world, in case you don't know. Then I've got my Adam Millards. So I've got this novella, Swimming in the Sea of Trees, which is about the forest I can't pronounce in Japan, but it's known as the Suicide Forest. Gods and Mobsters I haven't read yet. The October Boys I haven't read yet. This is really fun, the Ultimate Zombie Quiz book, and I did pretty well with it, I gotta say. And then the Susceptibles, which it seems to be on... Oh, sorry. Sorry, guys. I'm sorry. Lesser known creepy novel, and it really reminded me of The Frighteners. Do you remember that film? I don't have a copy of my favourite Adam Millard book, which is The Milk, because I stupidly lent it to someone who never returned it. I'll stamp these guys up so they don't seek revenge later. Oh, god damn, he's drunk! Okay, Paul Tremblay collection. I've added so many more books to my Christmas wish list, so I hope I get more. So, Head Full of Ghosts, Cabinet at the End of the World, Survivor Song. Amazing Possession story, Cabinet at the End of the World, fabulous, heartbreaking family apocalypse story, and then this is Zombies! Mark Castle, The Shadow Fabric, and then Sinister Stitches, and I think that these short stories are based in this world, and I haven't read either of these yet, which is shameful because I've had them for about a decade. Got my Nathan Robinson collection. I don't even know if he's still writing, but Devil Let Me Go is a short story collection. This is a really weird apocalypse tale about a family that wake up and people are just staring at their house. Catch Up on Everything is sad. Midway is scary as shit. It's about a deep sea swimmer. And then this is a splatterpunk little thing that he was involved in. Then I've got my Mark Towse. So The Bucket List is one of the greatest books I've ever read. Comedy horror at its absolute finest by Mark Towse and Keister Healy. And then I've got Nana by Mark Towse as well, which I can't recommend enough if you enjoy funny with your scary. Now I've got my Adrian Baldwin collection. Barnacle Brat I bought from him at a convention, but then he sent me an updated version of the book, which was really kind of him. I saw Apocalypse and thought Zombie. Floppy Shoes Apocalypse 3, Cream Pie Freak, so I'm not sure what this is about. Haven't read it yet. And The Snowman and the Scarecrow and Stanley McClure Must Die I haven't read yet. But what I have read from Adrian Baldwin are these shorts, Blown, Ego's Emporium and Pied, which are absolutely, they're all despicable and they shouldn't be funny, but oh my god, the guy is so funny. Pied especially, I was absolutely howling reading that, even though it's bloody horrendous. And then Devil's Acre, which is just like a cool little story as well. Yeah, severely underrated comedy horror writer, I have to say. Really wish more people were reading him. And then I've got my David Watkins books, The Exeter Incident, which is a really fun sort of like alien adventure horror, and then The Originals Return, which I think is werewolves, but I haven't read it yet, but that will be done before the end of the year. Also, my David Wong books, John Dies at the End, and This Book is Full of Spiders, are absolutely balls out, crazy sort of interdimensional horror novels, and if you can listen to the audiobooks, I recommend it. These are my Christopher Pikes that I have owned since I was like 14 years old. Monster is a really great vampire story, and Remember Me is a really good ghost story. I got my Cormac McCarthy's The Road, and No Country for Old Men. Unfortunately, Cormac isn't quite for me. I don't get on with his writing style, but I'm going to revisit No Country for Old Men. Then I've got my Graham Masterton collection, none of which I have read. So I've got Ritual and Walkers in one, The House That Jack Built, and The Chosen Child, which I'm hoping that this is werewolves. Then I've got my Clive Barker, and I'm ashamed that I have read hardly any of these. So the ones I have read are Mr. Begone and Books of Blood, but I also have Galilee, Imagica, Weave World, Sacrament, Cold Heart Canyon, Everville, and Clive Barker Omnibus. And some of my most prized books, because this is everything that Kit Power has published. Kit Power is one of my favourite writers of all time. I've got My Life in Horror, volumes 1 and 2, which are collections of articles about his, like, the building blocks for him of what made him a horror fan and a horror writer himself. And some of the topics covered you would never expect to be linked to horror, but so good. They're so good. I've got Midnight Movie Monographs, Tommy, and I haven't, this is like a biographical story, I think, non-fiction story, but I haven't read it yet, but because he told me to see the film first, so I'm going to see the film first. So you can't tell from the cover, but the book is called A Warning About Your Future Enslavement, which you will dismiss as a collection of short stories and articles by Kit Power. That is a really experimental book, like format wise, and I really enjoyed it. I've read nothing like it, actually. It was I can't get my head around how we even managed to put it together. Breaking Point is a collection of stories that are all written in the first person, and it is wonderful. This is Kit Power's Shadow Collection book, which isn't up here because I wanted to put it with my Kit Power collection. So here's his voices, excellent. A Song for the End is an apocalypse story that's also a heavy metal story, so it really appealed to me. The Finite is an apocalypse story and possibly my favourite Kit Power book, so great. And then God Bomb is about a guy who walks into a church threatening the lives of everyone in there unless God himself comes down for a little conversation. So that was super interesting. Now we have my Adam Nevilles, which I used to have some of these covers front facing, but I've run out of room because I've acquired more books, so I've had to put them all neatly side by side. So I've got this is everything he's published. So this is Under a Watchful Eye, The House of Small Shadows. These are both super creepy. The Reddening has got an opening scene that still gives me nightmares. Some Will Not Sleep and Hasty for the Dark are short story collections, and the reason that I have 2 copies is because he re-released this with a new cover by Samuel Araya, who is my favourite cover artist. So yeah, the old cover's good as well. It's just you know, I'm an Adam Neville completionist, and he gifted me this because probably because I stalk his writings so frequently. Cunning Folk, one of the greatest folk horror novels I've ever read in my entire life, and put me on a massive folk horror binge, and the cover is fabulous. Weird and Other Derelictions is my favourite short story collection of all time, and this is my favourite cover as well. It's so creepy. This collection is incredible because it contains no characters, and you might be thinking, how do you write a story, let alone a scary story that contains no characters? But trust me, he does it, so you just have to read it, really. And then The Vessel, which is his most recent release, and oh, she's so creepy. Love these books. Last Days is about a cult, which right up my street. Lost Girl is a bit of a departure from his usual stuff, and it's horrific, but not in like his usual way. Banquet for the Damned is creepy, and this is a cult kind of thing as well. And No One Gets Out Alive is, again, not I don't want to say a cult, but there is something really effed up going in this apartment block. This is one of the greatest stories I've ever read. Apartment 16 is one of my favourites of his. I've said this for all of his books, haven't I? He's just so good. God, The Five Nights at Freddy's Crew. Yeah, you behave up there, guys. Apartment 16, really creepy, creepy ass story. And then The Ritual, which you might have seen because it was adapted into a film for Netflix, which is amazing. Here are my Ramsey Campbells, which are next to the Adam Nevilles, because I know that Adam Neville is a Ramsey Campbell fan, so I thought maybe they could live together on my shelf. So Fearful Implications is a new Ramsey Campbell book of short stories, which are actually scary. The Darkest Part of the Woods is an oldie but a goodie. This is like a folk horror, really scary. The Grin of the Dark I read when I was a teenager, and that was my first Ramsey Campbell book, and it's so scary. And then I've got Told by the Dead, which is a short story collection, which I haven't read yet. And these 3 I have signed because I met him at a convention. In fact, most of my Adam Nevilles are signed. Oh, and all of my Tim Lebbins are signed, every single one. I go to a lot of writing and book conventions, so yeah, I'm really happy with my signed, really happy with my signed copies. Now I've got some Jeff Vandermeer, and I haven't read either of these either. So Annihilation and The Third Bear, these were recommended to me. I got Richard Matheson's What Dreams May Come, which I haven't read. Hell House, which I have, and that's a scary house story. Here are my Dave Jeffries. A Quiet Apocalypse, Cathedral, The Samaritan and Tribunal. That's all one series. The greatest apocalypse series of all time. I love those books. They're so good. And then I also have Tooth and Claw, which he gave me as a gift. So that was really, really nice. I haven't read it yet, but I plan to get to that before the end of the year. And then my two Nick Cutters, The Deep, which is sort of... it's almost Lovecraftian, this one. There's something really... Clive Barker meets H.P. Lovecraft in deep sea settings, so that was really scary. And then The Troop is one of the greatest sort of parasitic body horror books I've ever read. Okay, so here are my classics that I didn't want to put in other categories. So I've got the complete fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, and no, I have not managed to get through all of that yet. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which I really, really enjoyed, and I love this edition. Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, of course, the first sci-fi horror novel of all time. I don't know if you knew that. Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, but then I recently bought a much cuter edition of Metamorphosis, so once again, if you would like this copy of it, I will be happy to send it to you for free. Just let me know that you want it. The Picture of Dorian Gray is my first Oscar Wilde book, and even though half of what he writes is like super sexist, I found it hilarious, and I really, really loved his writing style, so I enjoyed that so much. Dante's Inferno is a long-form poem about the circles of hell, and I really enjoyed that. I have not yet read The Mysteries of Udolpho or The Monk, but these are gothic classic tales. Now we're going into my ghost section. So House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski isn't quite ghosts, I don't think, but this is where I thought it was most appropriate. Love this book. Mexican Gothic is a Mexican Gothic tale, which took a very, very weird turn that I wasn't expecting, that I liked. Cast a Cold Eye, which I have not yet read, and The Haunting of Henderson Close, which I haven't read because I recently just bought that. I also have not read Ghost Story by Peter Straub yet. The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell, however, is one of the scariest ghost books I've ever read, and the concept was so great. That's probably my favourite ghost book, full stop, so I really recommend it. Burnt Offerings by Robert Marasco, I didn't like as much as everyone else does, but maybe it just wasn't my flavour of ghost. Dark Matter by Michelle Paver is a really good winter ghost story. It's set in a snowy, cold setting, you know, so that's a great winter read if you're looking for something spooky. The Castle of Otranto is the first gothic horror book ever published, if I'm not mistaken, and that's a very weird ghost story. Slade House by David Mitchell is another weird ghost story, and Sarah Walters' The Little Stranger and The Haunting of James Hastings by Christopher Ransom I have not yet read. Then we've got The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which I read after I watched The Haunting of Bly Manor on Netflix. Okay, now we've got my Alien comics, self-explanatory really, and now we're into my really, really tiny extreme horror section. So I have got Zola by D.E. McCluskey, which is absolutely disgusting, and you know, if you're worried that there's cheese on the cover, you should be worried about the cheese on the cover. Judith Sonnets Judith Sonnets No One Rides for Free was my favourite of the indie horrors that I read. Womb by Duncan Ralston, had a really, really good time with that. That is nuts. Violence on the Meek by Stuart Bray is just one of the nastiest things I've ever read, but Dead Inside by Chandler Morrison is the nastiest thing I've ever read. Oh, I feel traumatised by that, and in fact I need to take it off the shelf because I need to write a review on that today. Okay. Oh, and then Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Bright is an extreme horror novel, and it is absolutely incredible. The story is just unreal. I just loved it so much. Now we're going into my zombie collection. So I've got Autumn by David Moody, which I haven't read yet, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which I haven't yet read yet, and The Last Plague by Rich Hawkins, which I haven't read yet. Then I have I Am Scrooge, A Zombie Story for Christmas, which I have read. So of course that's you know, a take on A Christmas Carol, but it's got zombies. Alice in Zombieland is a take on Alice in Wonderland, but with zombies. Then I've got these Resident Evil books by my little facehugger friend here. So I've got the 3rd and the 5th, I think, The City of the Dead and Nemesis, and I haven't got to those ones yet. Then I've got Dead Island by Mark Morris, which is a novelization of the game, which was, you know, that's just a fun zombie time. Theories of International Politics and Zombies, which is like it's exactly what it sounds like. Then I've got World War Z and Closure Limited by Max Brooks. So World War Z, the film is based on it, but the film is very, very different. This one has like no main character really. And then these are short stories that like follow on from the main novel. I've got the Ladybird book of the zombie apocalypse, which was fun. Zombie Apocalypse and Zombie Apocalypse Fight Back, edited by Stephen Jones, are the best zombie anthologies that I've read by miles and miles and miles. If you ever see Stephen Jones as the editor on an anthology, you may as well just go ahead and buy it because it will be good. Now we have the Walking Dead novels by Robert Kirkman and J. Bonenzinger, who yeah, and I have actually, I've got, you know, post-its in these, but I have actually read them. I'm just on a reread of them, so I've marked them because I want to go over them again. Breathers by S.G. Brown is one of the greatest comedy zombie stories of all time, and it's really, really underrated and not talked about enough. Can You Survive the Zombie Apocalypse is a, you know, it's a survival game in a book. So then I have Worse Than Dead and Less Than Dead, that are, you know, 2 in a series by Cal Brett. Zombies Galore is a zombie anthology, and then I've got The Zombie Nightmare Before Christmas, which is, you know, a take on the Night Before Christmas with zombies. Zombies is a massive collection of short zombie stories and Reanimators in there. Then I've got my Walking Deads. My compendiums are in the wrong order. They should be over here. I've just realised. So that's Walking Dead 1 and 2. And then the rest of the comics. So I have all of the comics, including Here's Negan. Then I've got the Tales for a Halloween Night from John Carpenter. Oh, Sick and Twisted. That was a Sick and Twisted comic. Guy Fawkes Demon Hunter, which is like an activity book from Benjamin Langley that's in his Guy Fawkes series, which was super funny. Zombie Survival Manual, because of course I would own something like this. Where's the Zombie, which is basically Where's Wally, but with zombies. The Scarfolk Annual was a present from my friend Justin, which is easily one of the weirdest horror books I've ever read, but it was like so much fun. I really enjoyed it. And then I've got some Algernon, I don't know how you say his name, Blackwood, ghost stories. And the reason that that's down there, I do have other Algernon Blackwood, but it's down there because this is the tall shelf that I could fit it on. Okay, we're on the very last one now, so I'm not going to get on the swivelly chair because I know that I'm going to knock all the pops off, but these are my Walking Dead pops, and for a while, I don't know if you can tell, but I was a little bit obsessed with The Walking Dead. I kind of own everything Walking Dead, so many pops. Then I have this pumpkin crocheted by my mum, and then this little plinth thing. These little pumpkins and this little ghosty are from the Ghost and the Pumpkin that I mentioned at the start of the video. Yeah, she sells it. They're so cute. I just love them. Yeah, this little pumpkin was needle felted for me by my mother-in-law. Got a ghosty, got a skull, got a Baphomet candle. So here's my Dean Koontz collection, and as you can tell by the post-its, I have read none of the Dean Koontz. And now we're getting into my vampire collection. So I've got the Sookie Stackhouse novels by Charlene Harris, which these actually aren't really my cup of tea, but I did read them all. They're probably in the wrong order as well because I dropped the box face down, so they all fell out. I just put them back in colour order. Dan Simmons, Carry On Comfort. I think that this is Psychic Vampires, and I'm about a quarter of the way through the audiobook, I think, so I'm enjoying it so far. Let the Right One In and The Historian I have not yet read. I Am Legend by Richard Matheson is one of my favourite stories of all time and one of the greatest vampire stories ever told. King Carrion by Rich Hawkins, which is a sinister horror book, and I really, look, this is going out of print by January, and I cannot recommend that you get this if nothing else, if you listen to nothing else I've said this video, this vampire story is so underrated and so like not known, and it's a crying shame. I would highly recommend that before it goes out of print. Then I've got The Vampire by John Polidori, which is the first vampire story published. I've got Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, which is a great, like, you know, that is a couple hundred years old also. 30 Days of Night graphic novel. Dracula by Bram Stoker, and I love this edition because of its beautiful tinted pages. And then I've got Powers of Darkness, the lost version of Dracula, which I haven't yet read, so I'm kind of curious about that because I really don't know what it is. Going down here, we've got my nice rock salt lamp and whatnot. I've got The Hunger by Alma Katsu, which I started, but I don't think I was in the mood for it. I'm going to have to go back. And then I've got the Vampire Chronicles here by Anne Rice, and as you can see how far I've got in the series. So I've read these, and then I've got these left. Really enjoyed Interview of the Vampire, The Vampire Lestat, Queen of the Damned, Tale of the Body Thief. I liked Memnoch, but not as much because it really isn't anything to do with vampires. Then feel free to mock me if you will, but I have the whole Twilight collection, so these are the main books. I've read them all. The short Second Life of Bree Tanner, which is a spin-off novella about one of the vampire characters, and then Midnight Sun, which was the newest one, and this is Twilight written from Edward's perspective. Why is it so long? Honestly, I mean, how can Twilight be this and then this is, it's the same story? And also, speaking of the same story, this is also a Twilight book. It's the first book, but it's the gender bent version. So she was criticised for the way she depicted her like romantic relationship and women, and particularly, so she wrote the book again. It's called Life and Death, and she swapped them. So now the vampire character's a girl, the human character's a boy. I haven't read it yet, but I do know that at the end the human character actually becomes a vampire, which undermines the point that she was trying to prove by writing this. So yeah, so when I read the original series, I really enjoyed them. They weren't like my favourite books, but I did really like them. Then I got Midnight Sun, and I really struggled through it. I was really bored. Like, I skipped over massive chunks of it, to be honest, because I didn't want to put it down and like DNF it, but oh my gosh. And yeah, I haven't got to this one yet, but I'm actually looking forward to it. And I've kept these because I am currently working on a video essay about Twilight. These are short story collections and anthologies. So I've got The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, the Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. I didn't really like that, to be honest. I've got Crown of Thorns by Trevor Kennedy, which was super fun. The Last Bus by Paul M. Feeney, which is a really great sort of short apocalyptic read. Sour Candy by Keelan Patrick Burke, about the worst child you've ever met, and that is one of my favourite novellas of all time. The Darkness at the Edge of Town by Brian Keene, which is sort of like a small-scale apocalypse, I would describe that as. It's kind of like The Mist meets Under the Dome. This Town Died With You by A.J. Spencer, which is spooky kind of demony stuff. Brady by D.W. Hitz, which is spooky kind of demony stuff. Why have I... No. That should be with the other D.W. Hitz book. Okay, then I've got Strange Frequencies by Richard Clive, which is one of the greatest short story collections that I've read in years. It was so good. The Melancholy Death of Oyster Boy by Tim Burton. I actually don't even remember why I have that, but I do remember enjoying it. Brennan LaFaro's Illusions of Isolation. That, again, is one of the greatest short story collections I've read in a really long time, and my favourite story in it is called Just a Note, and it really scared the bejesus out of me. It was so good. The Secret of Ventriloquism by John Paget is all ventriloquist themed or ventriloquism themed horror, and it is scary as shit. Catherine I can't pronounce this surname. I'm really sorry. If someone can tell me how I phonetically say that, I'd be really grateful. Looking Backwards in Darkness, which I haven't read this collection yet. Disenchanted by C.L. Raven is a twisted version of the fairy tales with a kind of feminist angle, I would say. Really enjoyed it, and it's really, really funny as well. Monsters by Paul Kane I haven't read yet, but looking forward to. I haven't read any Edgar Allan Poe, but after watching The Fall of the House of Usher, I really want to. The Sharp End of the Rainbow by Madeline Swan I haven't read yet, but looking forward to that. Haven't read any Madeline Swan. We Are Here to Hurt Each Other by Paula Diash, and my friend John McNee gave me this book, and I'm really looking forward to reading it because he highly recommended it. The Gift of Joy by Ian, is it Waits or Watts? I'm really not sure, I'm so sorry, can someone let me know in the comments? I'm really looking forward to this because I haven't read anything by him, but I know that he's good, so many people have recommended him. Let Your Hinged Jaw Do the Talking by Tom Johnston, and this is a first Tom Johnston book for me. Shadows, this is a cool little collection. I'd almost call this a retro collection, same as Dark Masks. I've read both of these, and you've got some of the heavy-hitting horror authors of our day in both of those. Ooh, my maze worm wants to get involved. My mum crocheted this little dude for me. I love him so much. Kids from Dark Chapter Press. Camp Slasher Lake I had as a review copy, so this is like serial killer stories. Some of them are super fun. This is decent. I can't remember it that much, but obviously you can see the theme here. Damnable Tales I got from my friend Louis, who's my husband's one of my husband's besties. He's so sweet, he always gets me a Christmas present, and I told him that I was writing a folk horror book last year, so he bought me this, which I thought was really thoughtful. These are freebies that I got at conventions, which I haven't read yet, but I will get to those as soon as I can, as with everything I haven't read. A Book of Horrors, again, this is a Stephen Jones anthology, so of course it's fabulous. The Forgotten and the Fantastical too. I cannot wait to read that one. The Book of the Sea is another Eagles Press book. It's beautifully illustrated. Flight or Fright, edited by Stephen King and Bev Vincent. So this is all sort of like flight themed horror stories in this anthology. I recently actually got to work with Bev Vincent, which was kind of a dream for me, very surreal. Contributed a story to The Perfectly Fine Neighborhood, which I mentioned way back at the beginning of the video. The Weird Tales Boys by Stephen Jones, the same Stephen Jones as the great of the great anthologies. This is poking out because I'm currently reading and reviewing it. This is a collection of essays about the Weird Tales. I think it was a magazine, bit before my time, but I'm having a really educational time with these articles. So interesting. The Lure of the Unknown, Algernon Blackwood, I don't know how I say it. Fear Itself. Right, so now we're going into my non-fiction horror, which is separated from my other non-fiction. So these are sort of writing guides or accompaniments to things. So horror fiction of Stephen King. These are all my Stephen King non-fictions. Stephen King is Richard Bachman. Creepy Kids, Stephen King adaptations, screen adaptations. Landscapes of Fear. Stephen King on the small screen. Tracing the Trails by Chad A. Clarke, which was that's a really fun book. It obviously only goes to a point because it came out a few years ago, but that's sort of mapping Stephen King's works. The Art of Darkness, I haven't read this one yet, and then the Stephen King Companion. So that's all just, I guess behind the scenes Stephen King stuff. And now we're going down to my horror academia, of which I have a lot, because I'm a nerd. So I've got these are my George Romero sort of interviews and the cinema of George Romero. Zombie culture I used for my dissertation, which I wrote on The Walking Dead. Gospel of the Living Dead. So these are collections of academic essays, basically, all of these. Zombie politics and culture, Better Off Dead. That's a really, really great one if you're doing any sort of horror studies. The Undead and Philosophy, American Zombie Gothic, The Walking Dead and Philosophy, The Walking Dead Behind the Show, Screening the Undead. So these are all the zombie stuff, and now we're moving into vampires. Zombies, Vampires and Philosophy, Dracula, Vampires and Other Undead Forms, The Universal Vampire, The Vampire Book. This is an enormous book of like all the vampire stuff. True Blood, I applied for a spot at a conference that I actually got, but then I had to cancel because I had a family emergency. So I wrote a paper about True Blood that I was going to present there. The Lure of the Vampire, Vampires Ourselves, and then These books are by Richard Hand and Wilson. Richard Hand is a guy that taught me in uni, and he is the most knowledgeable person about horror that I've ever met in my entire life, and he's just such a great teacher as well. So these are about the old Grand Guignol theatres. I would have loved to have gone to one of those back in the day. And then this one by Carl Gross is a smaller Grand Guignol book. Haunted Heritage, so this is sort of like a British history of haunted places. Cheapskates, Found Footage, it's an interest of mine, I just bought those for fun. The British Horror Films, so this is behind the scenes on British horror. Skin Shows, that's about horror. Images of Fear, screen horror. Telefantasy, screen horror and fantasy. Shocking Representations, so this is more character based in horror fiction. And then Gothic Television. These are Scored to Death. These are books of interviews and articles by people who compose music for horror films. So you've got people like John Carpenter talking about their process, and those are really interesting. I'm not a composer or a musician by any means, but I do really enjoy a good horror score, so I loved reading these books. How to Write Horror Fiction. So these are my how-to books. The Storytelling Animal, Dark Thoughts on Writing, Writer's Workshop of Horror, How to Write Tales of Horror, Fantasy and Science Fiction, Horror 101, that was a Crystal Lake book. Now Write, and then I've got these itty bitties, what even are these? Oh, Ghost Stories, that's just self-help ghost stories. Incredible Horror Movie Facts. I also am a bit of a sucker for books like this. I've actually just unloaded a whole bunch of books of that ilk. I think, if I recall, I found this quite helpful, and this one quite helpful. Just, you know, little tip. These are more just little reference books. I wouldn't sit down and just read them back to back. And I did enjoy the Crystal Lake one as well. That's just sort of like contributions from a lot of indie horror authors. Now we move on to my last shelf, and this one is a little bit of a mismatch. So I've got my beautiful books of photographs. So this is Monsters in the Movies, the John Landis book. So this is behind the scenes with photos, On Set with John Carpenter, behind the scenes with photos. These books are so beautiful. Savini, the biography, behind the scenes with photos. And then the essential horror movies. I don't even know which one of these four is my favorite to look at. They're all great. And then I've got the films of John Carpenter, which is sort of like background information and things like that. The zombie film, so this is like a map from the first ever, so from White Zombie to World War Z. So we're like tracing the trails through sort of zombie culture and cinema there. Book of the Dead is basically the same thing, but I think it's a bit more of a comprehensive overview. Grand Illusions, this is Tom Savini again. I'm very into special effects. Again, I'm not a special effects or makeup artist. I can barely even do makeup on my own face, as you've seen. Yeah, no, it's an interest of mine. I just watched the new Evil Dead and I was marvelling at the practical effects. Midnight Mass, this is also a book that contains photos and behind the scenes information about the show. This is one of my favourite TV shows that have come out ever. Encyclopedia of the Zombie, this one also has pictures, and it's the same as these, sort of mapping zombies through time. Listen in Terror is a book about radio horror by Richard J. Hand again, who did the Grand Guignol books. Big fan of his. I usually buy his books when they come out. Quite pricey, but worth it for me. Japanese horror films and the American remakes, that's an interest of mine. This is an autobiographical book from Tim Burton, and then I've got Masters of Cinema. This is a bit of background, and then I've got a corpse ride book. To be honest, I'm not that into Tim Burton. I've had these books for years. I used to be way more into Tim Burton back in the day, but my tastes have just changed a little bit. I've got this beautiful book of art. I won this at a raffle at Edgelit. So this is Daniel Serra's book of artwork, which is, you know, if you're a horror writer or an aspiring horror writer as I am, this is absolute nightmare fuel fodder. So yeah, I love this book. It's one of my prized possessions. And then these two books, I know these are a bit of an oddity here, but this is the shelf of height that I could fit these onto. So Dita Von Teese, and this is about burlesque and the art of the tease, and then the flip side of the book is about fetish stuff. I am a major Dita Von Teese Joyce fan, and I have been since I was about 17 years old. I absolutely love her. And then this is a book of photos and sort of like a history of Marilyn Monroe, which is way sadder than I didn't know about her life. So that is a beautiful, beautiful book, and it was informative. Here I've got my Walking Dead magazine. So as I said, I was a bit of a Walking Dead nut in the day, and I collected every single magazine that they released. I've got multiple copies of a couple of them because they released them with different covers. These are really, really hard to get now. They discontinued them, and you can't buy them new anymore. So I did get some of these on eBay, but I was pretty happy when I managed to fill my entire collection and get every issue. Then I've got 14 Times magazines, which I was subscribed to for quite a bit. These are Rue Morgue magazines, and then the little extra booklets from Rue Morgue. And then I've also got these ones from the Occult Area of Albion. These are great magazines also. And then I've got this bizarre magazine. I think this is the Dita Von Teese. Yes, this is the Dita Von Teese issue. So of course I've kept that for years and years. And then I've got these SFX and horror ones. These were the Walking Dead issues of SFX about the special effects. And then lastly, my library of Shakespeare, because I am quite a Shakespeare fan and I was obsessed at one point. So unlike the H.P. Lovecraft book, I have read the entire works of Shakespeare. So obviously this is all of his plays and also his poems. He wrote a lot of poetry as well. Poetry isn't really my bag, but I don't really think it was Shakespeare's bag, actually, now that I'm thinking about his poetry. So yeah, this is basically my current life. I did have more books. I had to offload a couple of hundred of them last year because there was just not enough room in my house. I've also lent out quite a lot of books. I do have more extreme horror that I've lent out to people and things like that, but this is my library, my little office as it stands. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're still here, then you have the stamina of a saint, because I realise we've gone over an hour now. I will see you next week with one of my more normal videos. It will be a top 10 of some description. So I'll see you then, and bleed.